And now I would like to say a few words for the attendees. So get ready for an informative session with Andrii. He will be presenting of multi-tenancy in Orchard Core. And during his talk, among other topics, he will explain the inner workings of setting up additional tenants and walk you through the process of configuring per tenant settings and services. And we will start in 1 minute. And I hope you will enjoy this session as well. And the break is over, so now we will have the second presentation.
Yeah, so let's go. Nice to see everyone here. Yeah, thanks for having me here and allowing me to start this nice event. So currently I work for a company from Miami, which called Lula. Yeah, and there are two reasons. First is very cool culture, and second is we do full stack F#. Yeah, so, and we are hiring. And the second interesting thing is I'm also a co-founder of a product that allows to educate employees. And at the end, you will get some interesting information about that regarding to Orchard Core. So what we will see today, I had such a need to build SaaS product. Yeah, and Orchard Core was a pretty good choice for that. And my talk will be based on that experience. And I will tell you about multi-tenancy, how it works, and what to do with it. So what is Orchard Core Framework versus CMS? So it's a platform to build SaaS solutions. It allows you to build modules that you can enable, disable, and so on. And of course, you can have multiple tenants. While when you have CMS, you can build one or several websites in one project and use all that nice features that I and Sebastian mentioned. So what is multi-tenancy? Multi-tenancy allows you to share resources and use less. Usually you log in from a single portal, yeah, but it's not mandatory usually, but it's how it usually works, yeah. And usually you have per client content, so each tenant has its own content and its own configuration, which means that you can have either common database or database per tenant, whatever is better for you. So what is good? We can reuse resources and we can lower costs because we build once and we run it for different clients, and that's pretty nice. Yeah, we don't need to deploy it multiple times, just one deploy, one update, and so on. But there can be some security risk with that if you don't do it right, and some tenants may consume too many resources that can impact another tenant. So what is tenant in Orchard framework? So it's just definitions that have name. Yeah, you can have version. You always have URL prefix, which is the first section in path. And you can set up to serve tenant from custom host if you want. And per tenant, you can enable or disable features. So guess how it works? Anyone has any ideas? So how does this isolation and build of DI works per tenant? Any guess? So, Paul, so that's pretty simple. It's just a scope at DI. So for each tenant, a scope created, and that's very nice. So it's just one scope level. And if you need to restart it, you just stop that scope, create new one, and enable a new features in it. How can you set it up? That's pretty simple if you know what to do. Yeah, so you can go to appsettings.json as you usually do. And there is a orchard core section in which you can specify tenants. And the first tenant, the main one, it's called default. And in there you can see properties that I've just mentioned a few slides ago. Yeah, the only one here is additional is state, which means do you want to serve this tenant or don't? Yeah, but for default, you, I guess you want, yeah, and you set running there. And features is just an array of your modules. And if you want more tenants, you just can specify them right here and they will appear from the beginning and will always be here. What is feature? So feature is just a module and it has a name of your assembly name. It has startup. And this startup is just a class derived from startup base. And it starts only if you enable it for particular tenant. As you understand, yeah, it just either injected into scope or not injected into that scope. So what is startup? It looks very similar to what you had before .NET 6. And it allows you to configure services and configure your app. And here you can do your customizations, you can change anything you want, authentication, authorization, add additional roles, and so on. And very important thing, don't forget to add this package reference. Yeah, because you will debug and don't understand what's going on, why module not running, but it's simple. You just need to add this target, and this is how your project is considered as module. Then what if we want a custom tenant, which we probably want in major cases? In that case, we can create shell settings, which have all that stuff. And also, of course, we can add state. And this is just a dictionary, so we can add additional properties and then store that properties to do additional setup. After we have settings, we create setup context. And we can enable features here. Pretty similar way, yeah. And it can be dynamic, so you can set up it in different ways. And here are errors. I will show you what to do with them a bit later. So then, if we want to create the tenant, we first need shell host, which is a class that interface that allows us to do that. And first, we want to set tenant is initializing, and it prevents it from getting requests and doing bad things while it's not yet ready. Then you can save or do any initialization. You can create database or create table or whatever is your setup logic to provision the tenant. After that, you may have errors. And if you have them, you want to exit not finishing the setup. But if everything is good, you can switch back to running, and save that settings to apply this. And this happens on, so when you set state running, yeah, it sets it immediately, and then you just store it in storage just to preserve the settings. And sometimes you want to call some logic on behalf of different tenant. Well, let me tell you about the sample. So in my solution, I had a endpoint which lived on a default tenant. And that endpoint cached authorization request. And after that, I knew what tenant is it. Yeah, because before that, I don't know what's the tenant. Only after parsing that query string in request. Yeah, so that's why I had to put this endpoint on default tenant and then apply authentication on a particular tenant that was provisioned. So how it worked? So first, I need to ensure that shell host is initialized and I can perform any actions with it. Yeah, so this initialize, if it's initialized, it will just don't do anything, just return. And then what I need is I need a scope. So here I create a tenant scope to work within the tenant. And I do that by its name. And then this is what I can do. Yeah, I can do using async and put lambda. And there I can execute logic on behalf of the tenant. So in my case, it was sign in for tenant, which applied authorization token and refresh token and so on. Sometimes you want to override module. Yeah, so for example, in my case, I watched at Azure settings module. I looked at it and I didn't like that it stores data in JSON on blob. I wanted to store that in a table, in Azure table, which is pretty nice for storing data and much easier to go to a table and see what's there and modify if you need something. So I just copied that module from sources, which stored to blob. And then I replaced project references to package references. Then I added targets to make it work as module. And I just removed classes that I don't need, and I re-implemented logic from storing to blob to storing into table, and used that module instead. So it just, as it located in your solution, it will just replace the previous module if the name is the same. Yeah, because your local projects have more priority than NuGet packages. And let's summarize. So what Orchard Core framework allows us? Yeah, it allows us to use our favorite ASP.NET Core with all its features, all packages. It allows us to create multiple tenants. It allows us to separate our solution into modules. So if you don't need tenants, you can use just modules. Yeah, you are not obligated to use tenants. And if you use tenants, you can granularly set up each tenant, enable, disable modules, which is very nice. You can set initial configuration in your appsettings config, appsettings.json, and tenants will start with that settings. And you can override the application setup. So if you ever created a CMS project, there is a setup module that starts until no tenant is ready, and that's setup. So the same way, you can just grab that module and override logic to whatever you want and create your setup for tenant setup, which is also very, very nice. And actually, that's all I have for you today. And I'm ready for questions. And you can see this QR code. So this QR code is a link to Orchard Core CMS tutorial, where you can learn how to build website from the beginning till deployment to Azure and localization. But one thing it's in Russian. Yes, so if but you can enter there and see the content. So if you interested in that content, yeah, I had intent to also add English audio to this video lessons. Yes, so you can write me, and I will know that you really want to try the tutorial. So I will collect that responses and dedicate my time to have English audio.
Okay, thank you very much. There is one question in the chat from Zoltán. The question is, do you use Orchard Core at Lula?
No, I don't use it at Lula. That was a side project from one of my friends. So he wanted to build an extension for Bittrex 24, yeah, which is unfortunately now not relevant because of no one no longer uses Russian products. Yeah, so but that was great experience to try this functionality for me.
Yeah, and also another comment that he can't scan the code. And would you be able to paste the link into the chat?
Emrah already pasted that. Thank you very much for that.
Yeah.
And so basically, that's a good question. So as long as it's just scope, yeah, it's scope in DI. So this means that it's a matter of creating scoped services. So as many scoped services and transient services you have, and use on execution, so it will be added per request, yeah. And singletons, no, it's the main points are singletons, yeah. So singletons are considered as scoped in this case, and they appear per each scope. So this is as many singletons you have, as much footprint will be added. Otherwise, it's just, so each request is just another scope, and each request then that scope is disposed. Yeah, so you don't have much footprint problem. There, I also seen a question. Yeah, so there was a remark that startup base, so class that you derive from startup base is not mandatory. Yeah, so if you don't need any setup, you can just, for example, you have just several pages, you want to serve the pages. Yeah, you can not add any startup and have a module without it.
We have a new question, actually, two. So the one that, can you show how to configure a custom domain for a tenant?
So in theory, it just as let's see, it just setting up this request URL host. Yeah, and then if you attach this domain to your, for example, your app service in Azure, and then request comes to your app, it's resolved by route and redirected to your tenant subpath. So basically, let me show you that piece. Yes, so here you have URL prefix and you have custom host. So custom host just redirect to the path with this URL prefix. And as we have a bit more time, so I want to mention another project that you may be interested in, and you can use in combination with Orchard core framework. It's a system that built in Ukraine, and on top of which you can build ERP system, you can build bookkeeping and so on. So it allows you to quickly build forms. So if you have such a need, and if you want to do it SaaS, combined with Orchard core framework, and it will be very fast and easy to build. And I will show you a bit inside of my solution. So here is how it looks. So what we have, so this is ASP.NET Core app that starts my modules. Then I have some infrastructure stuff, and this is my overridden module. So you see it has the same name, but it has less files, and they are called now table instead of blob. And here are my modules. So I have two modules. One module serves as setup, and it allows you to configure your settings. And the other one is, yeah, so this one allows you to change your settings, and this allows you to set up tenant and do authentication. So what I have here, yeah, I have here a pretty simple controller, which is called tenant, and I have method. So I have local and I have install. So install is what system that I integrate in calls, and it propagates me a model, and from that model I do some stuff, and I authenticate it for the tenant. And here I have create. So create let me see. So this is my tenant service, and in tenant service I have create tenant, and I create my shell settings. I save them to blob storage, and then I do setup context and perform setup, which will do what I shown you on a presentation. Change to initializing, then save to Azure table, and then I don't have any errors, and I save my settings. And what it allows me to do, so for default tenant, which does setup only, I have these two modules. So I want to have my crypto keys in Azure, and I want to have setup only. And when I create my another tenant, let's see, where is that? Yeah, in another tenant, I also need my crypto keys, and I need only settings module. So this is how it's split. Yeah, so one main tenant has only setup, which handles tenant creation and authentication, and the other module handles another tenant. And about storing to tables, so if someone needs that, I can share my code. Yeah, so it just have table. So I have table entity, and in table entity, I create dictionary, and from the dictionary, I fill in-memory collection for tenant. So this is my configuration builder. So what I actually do, I have the settings in my table, and when I read my tenant settings, I just merge it into the tenant. Yeah, so I have here, for example, these settings, and if I have another tenant here like this, some other tenant with some settings, so from table I would merge that settings in memory, and they will be applied to the tenant. This is what I do. And for saving, it's pretty simple. So I create tenant entity, which sets partition key. Row key I don't need. Partition key is my tenant. And I also add several properties and insert into a table. Yeah, in UI, so there is a remark in chat that it's very easy to add tenants in UI. Yeah, that's right. So if you need admin panel, then you don't need, probably don't need all this stuff. Yeah, and you can just reuse what's already there, just add that modules and use them. But in my case, I didn't need any admin panel, so that's why I implemented that myself.
Can I hijack the session and share the screen to show the admin panel and answer
Yeah,
a few questions
sure.
from the chat? Thank you. I will share my screen. So while Andrii was talking, I built Orchard as released on Met 7, and this is the setup. So when we start Orchard, you can say software as a service as a recipe, which will set up an Orchard website with the tenants management UI only. So here I will just create an account. This is a brand new website, which we call the default host. And when we go to admin, we'll have multi-tenancy management menu. Okay, and here we can create new tenants. So the current website is available as a tenant. This is what is called default here. And we can add a new tenant with this button and pre-enter some data that will be available in the setup screen. So everything we do here is just a UI to manage the list of tenants in the database and the file system. So here, if I say tenant 1, you can, so that was a question on the chat. How do you define the host name? Andrii showed it, how in the code you can set it, but usually we do it by configuration or in this UI where you define a host name. And for instance, it can be a domain name. You can use multiple domain names also if you want multiple domains to answer the same website, and then do your redirections if you want, or use star mapping, like star dot something. So all the domains, the subdomains will go to the same website, and then it's up to your website to handle the domain differently, like some down level sub-tenant management if you want in your own app. You can predefine the recipe you want and everything. So let's see if we can do it like with an agency website and we force to use SQLite, no host name, so we need to define a URL prefix like a tenant 1. So I will use localhost and a URL prefix. So I don't want to create a custom domain for that, and I will create it. And by default, it's not initialized, so it's available in the system, but it doesn't work. If I go to tenant1, there is a 404. But if I go to setup, then I go on the home page and I can fill out what has not been defined yet, like a name for the tenant. The tenant1 is the technical name. This is the name of the site, in this case here. And then I will create an account for this website. And now it's available under tenant1. So if I remove this prefix, I'm going to default tenant. And if I go there, I have this tenant. Okay, and this is the same one. And so there was one question, which was how much memory does a tenant take? So let's see how much approximately memory it takes. So if I do the same thing here, and I will just go look at Dumbly, I will just go look at the memory. So the memory, where is Orchard here? I just need to find Orchard. Terminal, this is Orchard Core CMS Web, so this should be that. Okay, so right now I see 212 megabytes are taken because I'm running it from the command line. And I will create a new tenant. Oh, I could even say, let's see if we can we unload it? We can reload, we can disable it. I will create a new one. So add tenant, the same thing, tenant2, URL prefix, no host name, recipe, I will use the same recipe, and database, I will use the same database, create. It's created, but nothing has changed. Okay, so it should still be the same amount of memory, 213. And if I go to setup, finish setup. Now it's loaded, and if I look at the memory, we see 295. Okay, so it took like 80 megabytes, but it's not really that. There is still some memory to be collected. It's just the garbage collector didn't go through. I believe that I'd like to be able to disable one and reload it just to see if it changes anything. So let's reload tenant 293. Can I disable it? 293. You see the garbage collector is not actually passing, so you don't see the actual size of the thing. It's kind of sad. But the last time we tried, it would take like 10 megabytes per tenant. And how we did that is creating a script that would generate hundreds of tenants and then seeing them loading dynamically and see how much memory it would take per 1,000 tenants, let's say. And we will reach 10 megabytes per tenant. It will depend on each tenant. It might have changed also since last time we tried, but it will depend on all the features that are available for each tenant. One nice thing, however, is that if I reload, the website is actually not loaded. It's available, but the tenant will actually start when we click, when we open a URL of the tenant. At just the first request, we will load the new DI scope and all the content from the database. So it doesn't take any memory if nobody is using the tenant. It's just lazy loading the tenant. So that's an important thing to make. Is there any question that was also in the chat that we can show on the UI? I see a question from Sipke.
Yeah, that was a question from Hashim about tenant APIs. So as I understood, as I used iHost, how it's called, iHost, iShellHost, yeah. So maybe Sebastian can tell more, but as far as I know, that's the only thing we need, right?
iShellHost, maybe?
Yeah, iShellHost, yeah.
I see a question, Vikash.
Like, do we have any other tenant APIs except iShellHost?
I don't think so. That's what you should do. Shell settings is part of tenants also, but iShellHost is the main entry point. And tenants can manipulate other tenants. Best practice to store tenant configuration, database, storage container as files, there are load time difference. Best practice to store tenant configuration. By default, it's using the file system and the database. Storage container as file, I don't know what it means. Does it make any load time difference? Probably, but right now there is just database storage for tenant configuration. There is also file-based configuration that is optional for what? What is the file thing that we have that is also available in database? Appsettings, yeah, probably.
Yeah, by the way, so do you run it from Visual Studio right now? Yeah. I mean this project, yeah, locally, right? Yep. Can you show app setting app data folder? Yeah, app data. Yeah, just the content.
I will have to let you know that there are 2 minutes left from this session. I didn't want to disturb you.
Time for next session.
And open JSON for a moment. Yeah. So this is the default setup, and here you can see these tenant settings that are not present in your app settings config, but stored after tenant creation. So when you create tenant, it's stored here, right? But as I told, you can apply another module which stores it in Azure Blob, or as I did, store in table. Yeah. So thank you very much for your attention, and use Orchard, build new sites, build new products.
Yes, thank you very much. And you will be able to continue this conversation during the breakout rooms.